What if the hushed tones and the polite condolences and even, the casseroles at a funeral reception, what if they're actually the exact opposite of how ancient texts tell us to deal with death?
It is a pretty jarring thought,
It
really.
really is. Welcome to today's deep dive.
Yeah.
If you are someone who loves to learn, someone who thrives on looking at the world through multiple perspectives, then you're really going to appreciate where we're heading today.
Oh, absolutely. Especially if you appreciate when a centuries-old idea just completely shatters your modern expectations.
Exactly. So today we are pulling apart an excerpt from a book called Living Hope. The full title is Living Hope, From the Empty Tomb to Pentecost Fire. It's a 50-day devotion by Pastor Rob Bailey of South Lake Church.
Right, and just to give you some quick context on that title before you really get into the weeds, the timeline from the empty tomb to Pentecost fire, it represents a very specific 50-day period in the historical Christian calendar. It basically marks the transition from the Sunday of the resurrection to the day of Pentecost, which is traditionally viewed as the explosive birth of the early church.
So it's a huge shift.
Massive. The book is actually structured to walk readers through that exact psychological and spiritual transition, like moving from this shell-shocked grief to profound, unshakable purpose.
And our mission today is to completely unpack one incredibly dense entry from this book. It's day 3, which is brilliantly titled The Feast After the Funeral.
I love that title.
Me too. We're going to slow down and faithfully expand on the profound imagery within this short text, really exploring how ancient scripture reframes human grief. Okay, let's unpack this.
Let's do it.
So the anchor for day 3 is a verse from the book of Isaiah. It's chapter 25, verse 8, and it reads, "He will swallow up death forever, and the Lord God will wipe away tears from all faces."
Which is, that single sentence is doing a massive amount of heavy lifting.
Yeah, it really is. It bridges this immediate, localized shock of an empty tomb in first century Jerusalem with a cosmic eternal promise.
What's fascinating here is the specific choice of words the author highlights.
How so?
Well, the devotion points out this really jarring shift from the sentimental comfort we usually associate with loss to aggressive, uncompromising battle language.
Battle language.
Right, because in the ancient Near East, and honestly in our own subconscious today, death is viewed as the great devourer. It's like the ultimate apex predator.
Wow. Yeah, it consumes time, memories, people.
Exactly. It consumes entire empires. But Isaiah paints a picture of a violent reversal. The devourer gets devoured. The text explicitly says death itself is swallowed up.
I'm realizing that, calling this battle language completely changes the utility of the text for someone who's grieving.
Oh, 100%.
Because when you're sitting in the immediate aftermath of a devastating loss, sentimental poetry about the circle of life or like the beauty of memories, it doesn't actually help.
It really doesn't.
It's like, okay, it's the difference between a doctor just giving you painkillers to manage the symptoms of a disease versus actually going in and completely eradicating the virus so it can never hurt you again.
That is a great analogy.
Right. Because if a wild animal breaks into your house and attacks your family, you don't want a poem about the majesty of nature. You want a weapon.
You want the threat neutralized.
Exactly. Calling death a devourer gives the reader a framework to actually be angry. It validates the horror of the experience. God isn't just pulling up a chair to help you manage your grief. He is actively destroying the source of it.
And that's key, because sentimentality eventually runs out of steam. It only addresses the symptoms of the loss, not the root cause.
Yeah.
The devotion notes that the destroyer is destroyed, and Isaiah mentions the removal of a shroud that is spread over all nations.
A shroud, like a burial cloth.
Historically, yes, a burial cloth. But here, it's described as this heavy, suffocating blanket of grief and mortality that covers the entire globe. Yeah, every single culture in human history has had to develop a mythology or some coping mechanism to deal with the suffocating weight of this shroud. And Isaiah says God just simply rips it
So it
off
removes it entirely.
completely. But, and this is so beautiful, within that aggressive cosmic victory, there is a striking moment of intimacy.
Right, the tears.
Yes, the text says, tears are wiped away by the hand of God himself. They aren't just dismissed as collateral damage in a spiritual war. They are physically addressed.
The juxtaposition of those two actions is just incredible to me. You have the violent destruction of a cosmic enemy, paired immediately with the gentle wiping away of a tear.
It completely changes how we view divine intervention.
It really does. And then the author pivots, right? He connects this ancient battle language of Isaiah directly to the historical anchor of John chapter 20, which is the narrative of the empty tomb.
Right. Week 1 of the devotion begins with stunned disciples.
Yeah, John chapter 20 is the textual anchor for the Christian claim of the resurrection. It's the story involving Mary Magdalene finding the stone rolled away, Peter and John sprinting to the tomb, finding the linen burial cloths just lying there empty.
And the devotion sets up this brilliant framework by pairing these two texts. It suggests that John 20 provides the evidence, while Isaiah 25 provides the horizon.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because the text makes a very specific claim about that evidence.
What's that?
It says, Jesus is risen before people are ready. And it describes the resurrection as the first crack in death's old kingdom. But I have to push back a little on this idea that they weren't ready.
Oh, why is that?
Well, didn't Jesus tell his disciples multiple times, like very explicitly, that he was going to be executed and then rise on the third day?
He did.
And beyond that, they literally watched him raise a man named Lazarus from the dead. I struggle to buy that they were entirely blindsided by an empty tomb. Were they just not listening for 3 years?
It's a fair question, but it's really a matter of trauma and human psychology overriding logical memory.
Okay, I'm listening.
When you watch someone you love endure a brutal public execution, your brain's logic center effectively shuts down. The sheer trauma of the crucifixion obliterated whatever theoretical theology they had discussed on the road to Jerusalem.
That makes sense, yeah. Trauma does that.
And furthermore, there is a massive categorical difference between what happened to Lazarus and what happened in John 20.
Right, because Lazarus died again.
Exactly. Lazarus experienced resuscitation. His physical body was brought back to life, but it was still subject to decay. That's a miraculous medical extension, but it is not the defeat of death.
So the disciples were expecting, at best, a surviving teacher.
Yeah.
Or maybe some kind of spiritual metaphor.
Right. They were walking to the tomb with burial spices to anoint a corpse. They were operating completely within the established rules of death's kingdom.
We weren't looking for a crack in the foundation.
Not at all. What they encounter in John 20 is a completely new category of reality. Resurrection, in this context, implies a body that has passed through death and come out the other side immortal, no longer subject to the devourer.
Wow.
They aren't just learning their favorite rabbi survived, they are staring at the opening of the end of death. Their brains literally lack the neurological architecture to process a reality where death's authority had been permanently broken. That is why they weren't ready.
Okay, that makes the evidence versus horizon framework so much clearer. It's like, if John 20 is the evidence and Isaiah 25 is the horizon, we can look at it like a peace treaty.
Ooh, tell me more.
Imagine you're a soldier in the trenches of a brutal war. One day, a messenger runs into the bunker and hands you a legally binding, signed peace treaty proving the enemy capital has fallen.
Okay.
That piece of paper is the evidence. That is John 20. But the war isn't practically over for you in that exact second. You still have to march home.
Right, you're still in the mud.
Exactly. The horizon, the day you actually reunite with your family, the day the parades happen, the day the weapons are melted down, that is Isaiah 25. The empty tomb is the signed treaty guaranteeing the war is over, even if you're still walking off the battlefield.
That is the exact tension the devotion highlights. The resurrection isn't the final scene of the movie. It's the inciting incident that breaks the foundational code of death's entire kingdom.
Yeah.
When you see a massive structural crack in the foundation of a building, you know the building is coming down. It's a mathematical certainty. It's just a matter of time.
The resurrection is that foundational crack in the kingdom of death.
Exactly.
Which fundamentally changes the definition of hope.
Mm-hmm.
Because the devotion spends a significant amount of time defining what living hope actually looks like for the modern church.
It does.
It explicitly rejects the idea of hope as a, and I'm quoting here, a thin smile pasted over pain. Instead, it calls it God's promise with muscle and bone. It's the certainty that the funeral dirge will not have the final word.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the author is launching a direct, robust critique of toxic positivity.
Oh, absolutely.
Toxic positivity is that cultural and often religious pressure to just pretend everything is fine. It's the demand to smile through your tears, to instantly find the silver lining, or to say, you know, everything happens for a reason while someone is actively bleeding out emotionally.
Ugh, I hate that.
Right. This text completely rejects that psychological bypass.
Toxic positivity is it's like painting over black mold in your living room.
Yes, perfect example.
It might look clean to the neighbors for a week or two, but the rot is still eating the drywall from the inside out. Eventually, the ceiling is going to collapse on you.
Exactly.
The thin smile pasted over pain is the fresh coat of paint. But muscle and bone hope implies tearing out the drywall, treating the rot, and rebuilding the studs. It requires acknowledging the absolute devastation of the mold before you can rebuild anything structurally sound.
And you need that structural integrity because, as the author points out, the church lives in the between.
The between.
Yeah, we live between the empty tomb, that initial crack in the kingdom, the signed peace treaty, and the full arriving feast of Isaiah 25.
Okay, right.
Living in that between space means holding two intensely contradictory realities in your mind at the exact same time. You are holding the brutal, undeniable reality of present, fresh grief in one hand and the absolute historical certainty of the future feast in the other.
So you don't have to let go of your grief to hold on to hope. You're allowed to feel the full weight of the fracture because the structural repair is already guaranteed.
Exactly.
And the devotion doesn't just leave this as high-level abstract theology either. It provides a surprisingly tactical next step for the reader to actually bear that weight when grief happened today.
It does. The author suggests a very specific psychological and spiritual exercise. The prompt is to bring one specific grief into the open before God and to answer it directly with Isaiah's promise that the Lord will swallow up death forever.
And it follows that with a prayer. Right.
Yes, asking God to set this strong promise deep in the reader's heart, to bring comfort where grief is fresh, and to bring Christ's victory to mind where the fear of death lingers.
The mechanics of that exercise are fascinating to me. Bringing a grief into the open and naming it, it literally changes how the brain processes the trauma.
This raises an important question about the psychology of affect labeling.
Okay, break that down for me.
In neuroscience, affect labeling is the process of putting feelings into words. When a person experiences a nameless, shapeless terror or profound grief, the threat center of the brain is highly activated.
It's just alarms going off everywhere.
Exactly. But the moment you bring that grief into the open and assign a specific name to it, you engage the logical part of your brain, which physically diminishes the panic response. By naming the grief, you are defining its borders. You are stripping away its illusion of infinite power.
It's no longer a monster in the dark. It's a defined enemy standing in the light.
Precisely. And from a theological standpoint, when you answer that specific named grief with Isaiah's promise, you are actively participating in the battle against the devourer.
You're using the evidence of John 20 like a weapon.
Yes, you are taking the historical evidence and wielding it against the reality of your current pain. It rewires your immediate psychological response to trauma by placing that trauma within a larger narrative of guaranteed victory.
But how does someone actively taste a feast that hasn't fully arrived yet?
Yeah.
Because the devotion ends with a blessing that the reader might taste even now, the comfort of the coming feast.
Right.
When your grief is incredibly fresh today, how does an ancient promise actually steady your physical body in the present moment?
It steadies you by permanently changing the trajectory of your story. Think about the experience of reading a massive, sweeping novel where the protagonist is going through absolute torturous hell.
Okay.
If you're reading it for the first time and you don't know how the book ends, the suffering feels meaningless, chaotic. It's deeply anxiety-inducing. Your heart rate actually goes up while you read.
Yeah, you're stressed.
But if you've skipped to the last chapter, if you know for a fact that the protagonist emerges victorious, that the villains are defeated, and that the story ends in profound joy, it completely changes how you experience their present suffering in chapter 4.
You still feel the weight of the drama, but it doesn't crush you.
Because you know it is not the end, the suffering is contextualized. To taste the feast right now is to let the certainty of that final victorious chapter bleed backward into your present moment.
Wow.
It's the deep, settling, physiological breath you take when you realize the devourer has a definitive expiration date. The anxiety of the unknown is removed, allowing you to grieve the loss without despairing over the ultimate outcome.
So what does this all mean? Let's pull this all together. Today's deep dive into Day 3 of Pastor Bailey's devotion isn't just a guide on how to be a little less sad after a loss.
Not at all.
It is an exploration of a fundamental cosmic shift in reality. The text forces us to look at death not as a natural, beautiful part of the circle of life,
No.
but as an enemy combatant that has been definitively engaged and defeated.
The great devourer is the one being swallowed. The suffocating shroud is being ripped away. And the very real, visceral tears we cry today are met not with distant, disconnected pity from the cosmos, but by the intimate, physical comfort of a creator who wipes them away.
If you are listening to this right now, whether you are deep in the thick fog of fresh grief, or you are simply trying to understand the foundational mechanics of the Easter season and what this 50-day journey to Pentecost is all about, I want you to hear this muscle and bone hope is available to you.
It is.
You do not need to fake a smile. You do not need the cheap coat of paint over the black mold. You are allowed to be angry at the devourer, and you are allowed to mourn the damage it has caused, because you know the structural repair is guaranteed.
The evidence has been provided in the empty tomb, and the horizon is firmly set at the feast. We are all just walking the road between the two.
Which brings us back to where we started. That polite, hushed funeral reception with the casseroles.
Yeah.
The text says the church is already tasting what is still coming. If the resurrection was the first crack in death's kingdom, what are the tiny cracks of heaven you can spot in your own life today? When you are sitting in the middle of a mundane or even a painful week, what does the appetizer of that ultimate feast look like on an ordinary Tuesday? Keep that thought with you as you walk through your week.